the best way to increase society's resistance to insulting or offensive speech is to allow a lot more of it.
Did you love Blackadder? Do you love Mr. Bean? Do you know that Rowan Atkinson is an incredibly shy, reticent and guarded man? He likes driving fast cars and he's perhaps one of the greatest clowns the modern world has ever known. Certainly one of the most famous comedians. How extraordinary then that Rowan Atkinson felt compelled to testify against the levels of censorship that are becoming normalised in our culture, and how that's an attack in effect on humanity itself. To laugh, to live in good faith, to recognise that even if you disagree with me and I dispute your way of living and your manner of communicating in good faith, we have to believe in freedom of speech. That freedom of speech is chief among our values, high in the hierarchy of principles that must be regarded as near sacred and perhaps even literally sacred. For where does all meaning come from? Where does all connection come from? And what does all true connection imply? Let's have a look at this speech. You might have seen it when it first came out in 2023. I know I did because I'm a big fan of Rowan Atkinson, but certainly it's become very popular now, likely in light of the UK's new attitude towards censorship, likely in light of the fact that the UK is making much of the incarceration of recent participants in protests. You, of course, like me, condemn all violence. You, like me, of course, are appalled and disgusted by racism, knowing that unity among us is the first step to being able to oppose those that control us. And you, like me, will love this articulate defence of free speech and great comedy coming from the genius that is Rowan Atkinson.
My starting point when it comes to the consideration of any issue relating to free speech is my passionate belief that the second most precious thing in life is the right to express yourself freely. The most precious thing in life, I think, is food in your mouth, and the third most precious is a roof over your head. But a fixture for me in the number 2 slot is free expression, just below the need to sustain life itself. That is because I have enjoyed free expression in this country all my professional life, and fully expect to continue to do so. Personally, I suspect highly unlikely to be arrested for whatever laws exist to contain free expression because of the undoubtedly privileged position that is afforded to those of a high public profile. So my concerns are less for myself and more for those more vulnerable because of their lower profile. Like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay. Or the teenager arrested for calling the Church of Scientology a cult. Or the cafe owner arrested for displaying passages from the Bible on a TV screen.
Rowan Atkinson is a comic genius, and genius, if you ask me, implies that there are aspects of what he does that are entirely organic to the point of being inadvertent, like the touch of the nose or his emphasis. These are possibly a combination of deliberate and impulsive, instinctual, comedic cadences. That's why I love it on Awaken Wonders, on our locals community. We do analysis of stand-up comedy. Let's do one on Rowan Atkinson, actually. I'd love to do a Rowan Atkinson special, take a few bits of him and get into Rowan Atkinson and what makes him a genius, you know, whether it's Mr. Bean or Blackadder. And then to learn, of course, that he is a highly principled individual who, in spite of his love of privacy, is willing to put his neck on the line because he recognized that something significant is happening, that people are being censored and subject to levels of control that are intolerable and in themselves ridiculous. Rowan Atkinson's been at the forefront of comedy for a long time. I keep mentioning his shyness because I remember Richard Curtis, who's been his partner in some of his best projects, Mr. Bean and Blackadder, saying that when he first met Rowan Atkinson, I think at Cambridge University, he thought that he was a cushion because he was so quiet and demure. To see him stridently defending free speech, and the examples he's given are such brilliant ones, aren't they? Saying a horse is gay. Loads of us in the UK have seen examples of people being arrested for social media media posts. And the principle of free speech is so important that I suppose what has to happen in order for us to accept that censorship is necessary is that the rest of the media environment has to create the conditions where it seems sort of plausible and even necessary. This free speech is leading to murder. This free speech is leading to chaos. We don't even want to censor free speech, but we have to because of what the free speech is leading to. Do you see how the legacy media would benefit from towing the line on that? Do you see how the government benefit always from the legitimization of authority, even if the individuals involved in the policy or the implementation of the policy or even leading an entire country, they themselves may not know what they do, but we know what they do. We know that they benefit from more authority. We know they benefit from creating conditions that advance the interests of the most powerful institutions and individuals on the planet. How do we know? Because we had our eyes open during the pandemic. We saw once again how a crisis for normal people is an opportunity for big tech giants, big pharma, governments that are able to regulate and legislate. We saw it and we mustn't forget it. And we are now in the midst of a further advance where they will once again increase their grip, increase their stranglehold, and they may relinquish slightly, but it will never go back to the levels that it was before. Remember, we're not still in the grips of the measures that were exerted during the pandemic, but it hasn't gone back, has it, to how it was before the pandemic, and it never will. And this will happen again, I predict, with successive crises, whether they are wars or health crises or nationalized emergencies. You'll be able to see for yourself in real time. The only thing you have to do is remember. And if, in addition to remembering, you can do this too. Demand certain rights and be willing to protest, always peacefully, never violently, always with love in your heart driving you, never the hatred that affords them the ability of regulating and controlling that they crave so plainly and pursue so aggressively. We can't continue to bring you this beautiful content without the support of our partners. We can't continue to bring you this awakening and hopefully enjoyable content without the support of our partners. That's why I've got to ask you, and I'm glad to ask you, are you struggling with back taxes or unfiled returns? The IRS is escalating collections, adding, get this, 20,000 new agents and sending over 5 million collection letters to kick off 2024 to spend on things that you probably don't agree with, like wars and measures and a total lack of infrastructure. In these challenging times, your best defense is Tax Network USA. Don't let the IRS take advantage of you. With over 14 years of experience, Tax Network USA have saved their clients over $1 billion in back taxes. No matter the size of your tax issue, their expertise is your advantage. They specialize in negotiating with the IRS, aiming to significantly reduce your debt. Tax Network USA doesn't just negotiate, they also protect your assets from IRS seizures and manage your yearly returns for ongoing compliance. Importantly, they are licensed to help you with all state tax issues, regardless of where you live in the United States. The clock is ticking. Don't wait as the IRS steps up its game. Seize control of your financial future now. Contact Tax Network USA for immediate relief and expert guidance. Visit taxnetworkusa.com/brand. Don't let tax issues overpower you. Turn to Tax Network USA and find your path to financial peace of mind. All right, let's get back to this content.
When I heard of some of these more ludicrous offences and charges, I remembered that I had been here before in a fictional context. I once did a show called Not the 9 O'Clock News some years ago, and we did a sketch where Griff Rhys-Jones played Constable Savage, a manifestly racist police officer to whom I, as his station commander, is giving a dressing down for arresting a black man on a whole string of ridiculous, trumped up and ludicrous charges. The charges for which Constable Savage arrested Mr. Winston Kadogo of 55 Mercer Road were these: walking on the cracks in the pavement, walking in a loud shirt in a built-up area during the hours of darkness, and one of my favourites, walking around all over the place. He was also arrested for urinating in a public convenience and looking at me in a funny way. Who would have thought that we would end up with a law that would allow life to imitate art so exactly. I read somewhere a defender of the status quo claiming that the fact that the gay horse case was dropped after the arrested man refused to pay the fine, and that the Scientology case was also dropped at some point during the court process, was proof that the law was working well, ignoring the fact that the only reason these cases were dropped was because of the publicity that they had attracted. The police sensed that ridicule was just around the corner and withdrew their actions. But what about the thousands of other cases that did not enjoy the oxygen of publicity, that weren't quite ludicrous enough to attract media attention? Even for those actions that were withdrawn, people were arrested, questioned, taken to court, and then released. You know, that isn't a law working properly. That is censoriousness of the most intimidating kind, guaranteed to have, as Lord Dear says, a chilling effect on free expression and free protest. Parliament's Joint Committee on Human Rights summarised, as you may know, this whole issue very well by saying, while arresting a protester for using threatening or abusive speech may, depending on the circumstances, be a proportionate response, we do not think that language or behaviour that is merely insulting should ever be criminalised in this way. The clear problem with the outlawing of insult is that too many things can be interpreted as such. Criticism is easily construed as insult by certain parties. Ridicule easily construed as insult. Sarcasm, unfavourable comparison, merely stating an alternative point of view to the orthodoxy can be interpreted as insult. And because so many things can be interpreted as insult, it is hardly surprising that so many things have been, as the examples I talked about earlier show. Although the law under discussion has been on the statute book for over 25 years, it is indicative of a culture that has taken hold of the programmes of successive governments, that with the reasonable and well-intentioned ambition to contain obnoxious elements in society, has created a society of an extraordinarily authoritarian and controlling nature. That is what you might call the new intolerance, a new but intense desire to gag uncomfortable voices of dissent. I am not intolerant, say many people, say many softly spoken, highly educated, liberal-minded people. I'm only intolerant of intolerance. And people tend to nod sagely and say, oh yes, wise words, wise words. And yet if you think about this supposedly inarguable statement for longer than 5 seconds, you realise that all it is advocating is the replacement of one kind of intolerance with another, which to me doesn't represent any kind of progress at all. Underlying prejudices, injustices, or resentments are not addressed by arresting people. They are addressed by the issues being aired, argued, and dealt with, preferably outside the legal process. For me, the best way to increase society's resistance to insulting or offensive speech is to allow a lot more of it. As with childhood diseases, you can better resist those germs to which you have been exposed. We need to build our immunity to taking offence so that we can deal with the issues that perfectly justified criticism can raise. Our priority should be to deal with the message, not the messenger. As President Obama said in an address to the United Nations only a month or so ago, laudable efforts to restrict speech can become a tool to silence critics or oppress minorities. The strongest weapon against hateful speech is not repression, it is more speech. And that's the essence of my thesis, more speech. If we want a robust society, we need more robust dialogue, and that must include the right to insult or to offend. And even if, as Lord Dear says, the freedom to be inoffensive is no freedom at all. The repeal of this word in this clause will be only a small step, but it will, I hope, be a critical one in what should be a longer-term project to pause and slowly rewind a creeping culture of censoriousness. It is a small skirmish in the battle, in my opinion, to deal with what Sir Salman Rushdie refers to as the outrage industry. Self-appointed arbiters of the public good, encouraging media-stoked outrage to which the police feel under terrible pressure to react. A newspaper rings up Scotland Yard. Someone has said something slightly insulting on Twitter about someone who we think a national treasure. What are you going to do about it? And the police panic and they scrabble around and then grasp the most inappropriate lifeline of all, Section 5 of the Public Order Act, that thing where you can arrest anybody for saying anything that might be construed by anyone else as insulting. You know, they don't seem to need a real victim. They need only to make the judgment that somebody could have been offended if they had heard or read what has been said. The most ludicrous degree of latitude. The storms that surround Twitter and Facebook comment have raised some fascinating issues about free speech, which we haven't really yet come to terms with. Firstly, that we all have to take responsibility for what we say, which is quite a good lesson to learn. But secondly, we've learned how appallingly prickly and intolerant society has become of even the mildest adverse comment. The law should not be aiding and abetting this new intolerance. Free speech can only suffer if the law prevents us from dealing with its consequences. I offer my wholehearted support to the Reform Section 5 campaign. Thank you very much.
Yet another example of comedians clearly having more common sense than politicians, and great communicators like Rowan Atkinson being able to illustrate points that might otherwise be lost in endless bureaucracy, always offered to us as protection or convenience. Always we're being told that big tech and big government and big business want to keep us safe and want to protect the vulnerable. It's extraordinary, isn't it, how they always seem to benefit from these measures. Surely then we should demand protection and alliance from one another and opposition to them and their plain as day measures of control. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the comments and the chat? Remember, if you're not on Awake and Wonder yet, become one. You can come see me live anywhere in the world just by following the simple instructions, as well as getting access to additional content all of the time. My favourite bit as well is when he goes walking around all over the place. We can't continue to bring you this beautiful content without the support of our partners.
Hey, this is exciting. We've got a great partner today. It's Rumble. But beyond Rumble, is Rumble's latest venture. Let me ask you first, are you a Sleepy Joe type character with zero cognitive performance, struggling to muster focus and brain power for basic things like running the United States of America? You've got to stop drinking woke liberal coffee that hates you and your way of life and start your day by drinking Rumble's very own 1775 coffee. This is going to be the best tasting coffee you've ever had. Seriously good, ethically sourced from a family farm in the high altitude mountains of Bolivia. Not in the Bolivian lowlands run not by a family but by a single man still living with a pet. No! Instead of waking up and drinking your big corporation-owned woke ideology coffee that's probably making you sick from the pesticides it's sprayed with, try Rumble's 1775 revolutionary coffee. Support freedom of speech. Build a parallel economy that actually values you and loves you. My favourite? It's dark, of course. I've always found the lure of the dark irresistible. I'm sorry, how can I stay mad at you? But you're just going to have to wait over there for a little while. Level up your morning routine with a 1775 coffee. Sleep all night knowing your hard-earned dollary dues are going towards supporting freedom-loving creators like me on Rumble. Visit 1775coffee.com now. Pick up your first bag. Use the code BRAND to save 10% on your first order. Oh, come on. Why choose, you know?
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.